Hello and welcome to Good Conversations. My name is Thompson Smith. We're honored to have with us again today Pat Williams. A proud native of Butte, Pat attended the University of Montana, William Jewell College, and the University of Denver. In the 1960s, he served 2 terms in the Montana State Legislature, and then beginning in 1978, he was elected to an unprecedented 9 consecutive terms as Montana's representative in the U.S. Congress. During that 18-year tenure, Pat served as Deputy Whip and Chairman of the Post-Secondary Education Committee. And since his retirement from Congress in 1997, he's been Senior Fellow at the O'Connor Center for the Rocky Mountain West and has taught classes at the University of Montana. He's one of the founders of the 8-state progressive policy group called Western Progress, for whom he is the Director of Northern State Operations. Like one of our previous guests, Joe McDonald, Pat was named in the year 2000 by the Missoulian to its list of the 100 most influential Montanans of the 20th century. Welcome again, Pat. Thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Thanks, Tom. I wonder how I ever got in the same room with Joe McDonald. That's quite a privilege for me, I'll tell you.
Well, I would have to agree. Joe was on the program just a couple weeks ago.
Was he?
We had a couple great interviews with him.
I've got to also, before we start chatting, I want people to notice this tie that I wore for the first time today, because your good chairman, James Steele, and the good members of the Tribal Council sent me this beautiful thing for my 70th birthday. 70.
Wow.
Not too long ago. You like it?
It's beautiful.
Isn't it? It's just gorgeous.
Yeah. What a great honor. Before we get going, I should mention that in the first program, we discussed politics and partisan issues. That ran just before the primary. In this program, we'll discuss issues in a more nonpartisan way, including your group with Western Progress, your work with Western Progress. So, first of all, let's back up a second. And what is progressivism?
Yeah, it's a good question. Progressivism doesn't have very much to do with partisanship. One of the most progressive, for example, members of Congress, let me use that example because I, as you mentioned, spent 9 terms there. One of the most progressive members of Congress in Montana history was the first woman elected to Congress, Jeanette Rankin. Jeanette was a Republican, but she was wildly progressive. Some of the least progressive members of Congress, and I won't name them, were Democrats, not current Democrats or Democrats in the recent past, but early Democrats who particularly had a great misunderstanding of the value of tribal government to this country and were anti-Native American, and a few of them were Democrats. So progress, I think, means setting aside and picking the best policy, the best ideas, wherever we can find them. Democrat or Republican. I do personally find that most of the progress has come from the left in American history, but nonetheless, Western Progress, this group that I helped found, excuse me, doesn't deal with partisanship, just tries to find good ideas.
And historically, progressivism has been associated with kind of a populist, antitrust, kind of concern about the undue concentration of wealth and power in the country. Is that fair to say that those are kind of some of the fundamental aspects of progressivism, whether it's Republican or Democrat?
I think that's right. I think populism, particularly populism on the center left, can lead to a lot of progressivism. There's also populism on the far right, though, and I think that's a dangerous kind of populism because it abhors government at almost any level. I know a lot of very far right-leaning Republicans who have almost made a living, certainly made a career on saying they're against the federal government, but when you scratch them, what you find out is they're against all government, and the one they fear the most is school boards, the most local of all governments. So it depends what kind of populism one is talking about. The populism center-left has been relatively healthy in America.
I guess, when you're mentioning that there are Republicans and Democrats, I mean, some of the prominent Democratic progressives of the 20th century, people like FDR, Mike Mansfield, I guess, could be called a progressive.
Lee Metcalf.
Lee Metcalf. And on the GOP side, Teddy Roosevelt.
Yep.
And I should mention Joseph Dixon.
Yep.
And I mean, when we mention those two names on the Flathead Reservation, that might not have altogether good connotations. After all, Dixon forced through the Allotment Act,
Yep.
and Roosevelt signed it.
Right.
So what lesson can be taken out of that? I mean, I guess it's just kind of a humbling cautionary tale.
Well, there's, the thing we know is there's no purity in politics on the right or the left, progressivism, liberalism, conservative. They all have their flaws. That's why I think one has to pick and choose where one finds good answers. Mm-hmm. I think the great flaw in people like Joe Dixon was that too often they went with the crowd. Now, Dixon has examples where he didn't do that, of course, but this thing about being anti-Native American, at one time in Montana and throughout the West and in places like Oklahoma, being anti-Native American was to mean you would get the majority to vote for you, mm-hmm. right? So it was a pandering and nasty and dangerous thing. There were times, frankly, like on the irrigation district turnover here on this reservation, where I stuck with the tribes and the Native Americans because they were right. Mm-hmm. But it was not the popular thing to do.
You were risking votes.
Oh, I was risking a political career mm-hmm. on it. But, it was clearly the right thing to do, so I did it. I find occasional fault with some of my colleagues and, of course, in history, members of Congress who served before me, in their rush to get out in front of the crowd instead of examining the issues and doing what they think was probably right, even though it may only satisfy a minority of people.
Well, for a long time in the 1980s and 90s, in Montana, progressivism seemed to be on the downturn. Do you see that turning around now?
I do. Throughout the Rocky Mountain West, the 8 states, people define the Rocky Mountain West differently, but let's just say it's 8 states from the Canadian-Montana border down to the New Mexico, Arizona, Mexican border. Those 8 states for a very long time, about 20 years or more, were fairly conservative places, and parts of some of those states, including parts of Montana, were extremely conservative, almost to the point of being dangerous. And by the way, anybody that doesn't think that hard right conservatism is not dangerous ought to remember the Oklahoma City bombing. Tim McVeigh was a hard right conservative, right? It can be very dangerous over there. That was part of the West for a long time. Republicans were winning everything, and most of them, by the way, were hard right Republicans, very conservative Republicans that were being elected governors and to the state house and the state senate and to the federal Congress. Now, I came back from Washington, not because I didn't like my job, I did, I loved it, but I loved Montana more and I missed it, so I've now been home 12 years. When I first came back, there wasn't a single Democrat governor in any of those 8 states. Today, there are 5 out of 8 who are Democrats, and we see legislatures. And here in Montana, we see a very popular, kind of populist Democrat governor, and a relatively progressive Senator Max Baucus. Both Schweitzer and Baucus are going to win by a landslide. So, as Bob Dylan said, the times they are a-changing.
And John Tester now.
And John Tester, who really is a kind of an old-style progressive populist and a delightful character.
A prairie populist.
Prairie populism, yeah.
Well, interesting. I mean, what do you attribute this resurgence to, though? I mean, you mentioned your return to Montana. Maybe that's part of it.
I don't think so, although I have done my best to try to help elect progressives in some of the surrounding states, including Idaho and Utah and Colorado and Idaho, including traveling to some of those places to help with fundraisers and give speeches for some of my colleagues that I think are progressive enough and have run pretty successfully in a couple of those states. But I don't think I had a lot to do with it, to be truthful, even though I've helped form some groups, including this group you were kind enough to mention, Western Progress. What I think is happening is that pendulums swing one way and they go quite a ways, sometimes too far one way, and then they come back. The pendulum, the political pendulum, is coming back, and I don't think it's just a force of gravity doing it. I really think that that a lot of elected officials in the West, a lot of conservative elected officials in the West, have made significant mistakes. And one of the things that Westerners have a deep feeling for is place. Environment, protecting it for our grandkids. Republicans, it is widely understood, have neglected to do that. They've been on the side of every extractive industry corporation. They've been against giving workers good benefits and good wages and allow them to organize. They have not wanted to put the kind of stipulations on extractive industries, reasonable stipulations that we need to protect the landscape and the waterway and the air. And I think it's that lack of environmental sensitivity that has doomed a lot of conservative Republican candidates in these 8 states.
That's interesting, because for a long time in the 80s and 90s, that was not the conventional wisdom.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people were surprised, for example, in the late 90s, when there was an initiative in Montana by which, by popular vote, Montanans voted to ban cyanide heap leach mining in the state.
Darn right. That shocked people in other states. It was not a great shock in Montana, I think. People here sort of wanted to protect the water.
Even though they were outspent by the mining industry by
5 or 6 to 1 or so.
Something.
Yeah. It was a significant victory for Montanans who want to protect the environment. And it's a cash register issue. Montanans understand that this place is a cash register if we can keep it clean enough. You know, hunters and fishermen and tourists and guides and outfitters and all the rest of it. Probably the people with the greatest tradition of protecting the environment and voting for candidates who will protect the environment throughout the West are Native Americans, by the way. And I don't say that because this show is seen fairly widely on this reservation. I say that at Rotary and Exchange clubs in Billings and Great Falls and elsewhere.
Yeah. No, clearly that's been true. I mean, the actions of this tribe to protect the environment over the last couple of decades.
Fantastic.
One thing that has really gone down in Montana, declined over the last 2-3 decades, and coincided with that decline in the 80s and 90s of progressivism, is the union movement. And the union movement is still not back on its feet by any stretch of the imagination in Montana. What about that? What about the absence of that? Can anything make up for that in terms of kind of an engine for progressivism?
Well, the loss of authority of workers to get to the bargaining table, and the way you do that is through organizing, and that's called organized labor, labor meaning workers, and those are called unions when you form them. And the loss of that authority for workers, you know, it's not for union bosses. Corporations have managed to make unions look like union bosses from the Bronx. That's not what it's about. It's about the common worker having a say at the table for benefits and salaries. Organized labor now only represents 7% of the private workforce. And that also coincides with the greatest gap between rich and poor, between rich and workers, that we've seen in American history in 150 years. And I think unions can help save us, but it's a long road back.
Yeah. Well, let's continue talking about that after we take a quick break. Please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
In February 2009, most television stations will convert to digital transmission and no longer provide analog service. Low-power translators and Class A stations are not required to cease analog broadcasts. For more information, call 275-4878. If you watch television on cable or satellite only, you need not do anything. If you watch free over-the-air TV, you may need a converter box if your TV set is not digital. Set-top converter box coupons worth $40 toward the purchase of these devices can be requested by calling 888-388-2009 or visiting www.dtv2009.gov. When purchasing a set-top box, be sure it has analog pass-through if you intend to watch analog and digital stations. These devices are listed on the dtv2009.gov website. Call 275-4878 if you need assistance or information.
And welcome back. We're continuing our conversation today with Pat Williams about progressivism and a number of policy issues in the West. And Pat, you're one of the founders and a director of Northern Operations for Western Progress, an 8-state group based in the West. Tell us what it is.
Western Progress, as you say, was founded about a year ago, although we have a little less than a year now under our operational belt. It took us a month or two to get up and really get going, get hired, open our offices, which are in Phoenix, Denver, and Missoula. Western Progress is an 8-state progressive policy group that is trying to make a difference, ultimately, in proposing and passing legislation that would benefit everyday people in the West. We're trying to develop policy on various issues, some of which I think, Tom, you know about, but I'd be glad to answer questions about it.
Well, let's touch on some of those. I was just noting that on the website, under the mission of Western Progress, it stated that Western Progress envisions a West that honors the ideal of a more just society through opportunity, equity, freedom, independence, and our shared love of place. So at the core of Western Progress is this mission of justice.
Justice, fairness, equality, equity, treating other people kind of like we'd like to be treated, and not just we in Western Progress, but in the neighborhoods of this land. Corporation executives, by the way, live in the neighborhoods of this land, and so we include them in our insistence that equity prevail. The wage gaps, which we've talked about, are not equitable. That's not to say that there ought to be a lot of handouts and all the rest of it. We do have a capitalistic system in this country. It's just that workers ought to be able to bargain. It's that everyone deserves a right to a clean environment. Our kids don't have to breathe dirty air.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that.
Well, speaking of the environment, one of the issues mentioned on Western Progress's website is climate change. Tell us about why Western Progress is concerned about that and what it's trying to do about it.
Climate change may affect the 8 states of the Rocky Mountain West in a more detrimental way than it does any other region of the country, except perhaps the coastal areas where you're going to have the rising sea levels. And we're going to find, if this continues, and it's going to, this melting, we're going to find major cities have to move part of their city out because they're going to be flooded around the world and here in the United States. There are going to be crop failures in this country. We're going to have family farmers who are already in trouble losing everything simply because of the way the climate has changed. Those farmers that survive are going to have to find different crops and different rotations. The same thing is true of the livestock market. The forage is going to be changed. Water is going to change in the West, and water is our lifeblood, as we know. So Western Progress, in cooperation with other groups, is trying to first get a handle through research on what is coming, what can we expect. And the research is pretty darn good, despite what the detractors say about it. It does demonstrate significant, serious, genuine problems.
One of our first guests on this program was Steve Running.
Oh, he's terrific, isn't he?
Yeah, Nobel Prize winner from Montana.
Yeah.
And he laid out the case for us then that, and forest fires also were one of the main things that he touched on.
Yep.
And so Western Progress is trying to get a handle on kind of laying out what the evidence is for climate change, what it's saying, and then is it also advocating for certain policies, or?
Not yet, but we're trying to come together with people like Steve and others to say, what is the problem exactly? And can legislation or change in attitudes of the public, that's really important, help us get through this very dangerous, perhaps catastrophic time ahead. And we don't have a lot of years to make these changes. We got to start quickly, and it's got to be done through legislation, including alternative energy and, very important, conservation of energy. Those things are very necessary, and Western Progress hopes in the short run to help, along with other groups, come up with some solutions.
Yeah. Just yesterday online, I saw a piece by Bill McKibben, the well-known environmentalist, saying basically that we literally are out of time, that if something dramatic doesn't happen between now and 2012, it'll simply be too late to avert total catastrophe. And he just started a group called 350.org that says that basically we have to get below 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We're now at 385.
I respect Bill McKibben. I don't know him, but I sure have respect for his work. And it's a tough road to hoe, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we have a short time to get there.
Yeah, huge issue. Another issue that Western Progress is working hard on is energy, which relates directly to this. Tell me about the work that Western Progress is doing in that area.
Well, energy, particularly the coming of alternative energy and getting to it quickly, is very important to Western Progress, and we demonstrated that by having our first conference on Phoenix on the issue of alternative energy about, I think, 9 or 10 months ago. And since then, we've been working with cities and states and electric co-ops and electric companies to try to determine ways, and legislators to try to determine ways, either through mandates or volunteer, to try to move very quickly toward alternative energy. I noticed the other day Bill Clinton said that there's a great wind corridor that runs down through the Rockies and that it touches reservations throughout the Rockies, and he was suggesting big wind turbines, if they could be, not detrimental to the great scenery on so many reservations. Big wind turbines that might help us, and of course would economically help reservations as one of the answers.
Yeah, wind clearly one of the big things coming, and a wind turbine factory going up in your hometown of Butte. Isn't that right?
Yeah, they're putting a factory there that's going to make these huge blades.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to going through that factory when they, there they are. They've gone from copper to wind.
Well, that's Western Progress, I guess. Speaking of progress, what about healthcare? That's another one of the priorities for your organization, and it's certainly a hot topic this year.
It sure is. We've just concluded some research that shows how many young Westerners, kids, are going without health care. It's astonishing. And, I don't want to sound like, I don't want to be too cliche-ish about this, but it is true, isn't it? Here we are in the richest nation on earth, and a fewer number of our people have good health care insurance coverage than in almost any other industrialized nation on earth. It's a tragedy. If a foreign power came along and imposed our current health care insurance system on America, we'd declare war on that foreign power. But here we are allowing it to happen, and here we are without, at least thus far, the politicians to become the leaders we need to say healthcare is important and I'm going to push it. Mm-hmm. That's what we need. Mm-hmm.
The Frontline just aired on this station, actually, an interesting documentary where one of their seasoned reporters went to, I think, 5 or 6 nations around the world, all of which have national health care like every other industrialized nation in the world, and investigated their systems. And in none of those countries is anyone going bankrupt from health care bills.
No, of course not.
He asked questions relating to how long does it take you to see a doctor, and do you have choice of doctors and things like that. Yet in this country, even the Democrats running for president aren't really proposing national health care.
No, they're proposing to keep, and this is what Mrs. Clinton proposed in the beginning. Obama has a plan that's not quite as good as hers, but both of them are saying, let's keep the private sector in it. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I noticed that Senator Baucus is for that as well. I'm hopeful that whatever system is developed, and I think we're going to have national health care insurance now. It's not that there's socialized medicine. Nobody has ever proposed that in America that has ever gotten anywhere with it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not for socialized medicine, but I am for getting everybody in the pool. And I'd rather not do it through a hopscotch state-by-state pattern, because then we'll have too many discrepancies and too many people falling through the cracks when they change jobs or whatever. We need to mandate national health care insurance, even if it's run a big part of it by the private sector. Now, Barack Obama, for example, does not want to mandate it. Well, I'm glad Barack Obama wasn't Franklin Roosevelt, or Social Security wouldn't have been mandated. The only reason Social Security works is it's mandated. You have no choice. I want to see health care along those same lines.
But the mandate with Social Security works differently than it would with health insurance, because wouldn't the mandate in health insurance work where it's putting the onus on the individual rather than on their employer?
Oh, I think you do it on both myself. I'm not sure either Hillary or Barack Obama have it quite right. I think you have to, the appropriate way to do it is to, at least one way to do it is to do it through the current system of work. Everybody that works has health insurance through their employer. That employer and the worker will contribute to a private company to provide them health insurance. That's one way to do it, but you'll still find people falling through the cracks if you don't mandate it.
Yeah, understood. Well, thank you again for taking the half hour to be with us. There are only 8 more issues to discuss.
8 more issues, 2 more hours. Our viewers are fortunate they don't have to sit through all of that.
Oh no, I'm sure they would love it. And I would too if we had the chance.
I would as well.
But thanks for being with us. If you would like to learn more about Western Progress, we'll post the website at the end of this program. Also, if you have any comments for us, please email us at goodtalk@blackfoot.net. Thanks again for being with us, and thank you again, Pat.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, we'll see you next time. So long.